All right, I wanted to kind of, I know some of you are ready to, start on the proof. So I want to go ahead and get something going there. So in case that there's a lot of other questions, you could listen to this video and get going. Um, on a proof, we're gonna do some of the same things we did on the previous worksheets. It's just that we're gonna have to come up with the statements ourselves. The book doesn't have you do this, and I think it's just we really kind of need you to be able to do a whole proof. But, there's an answer key so you can look if you get stuck. So if you're working on this by yourself, remember there is an answer key and try to follow the proof from the answer key. That's something you should be able to do at this, stage in your mathematical career. But we're going to do a few things ourselves just to kind of get started. Okay. So in a proof, what you want to do, we have two triangles, and they want us to show that PQR, that top triangle, is congruent to PSR, the bottom triangle. And they tell us some given information, so we want to kind of look at what we know already. We know that PQ is congruent to PS. All of our given information, that's what we're going to use to make our statements in a proof. That's supposed to be 1 mark. It's just that, anyway, I want to make sure that, that's just 1 mark. And I'll just color code here, but use the number of tick marks. QR and SR are congruent, so they're telling me this one is congruent to this one. I don't have to use a different color. I could just mark it with the 2 marks. All right, so we're supposed to prove they're congruent. Now remember in class what we were looking at is I've already got 2 sides that are congruent, right? What would it take to show these are congruent? Is there any other information? I know I need 3 pieces of information because all those theorems about proving triangles congruent, you had to have 3 things that were the same in both triangles, and some of them didn't even work. Like we said, SSA doesn't even work. So if I want to prove these congruent, I don't know anything about the angles, but if you notice, there's a shared side here. And remember, McCabe kept seeing all these really quickly in class. That shared side there, PR, is the same side in both triangles, so it's going to be congruent to itself. And the reason it is going to be the reflexive property. So these are the things we're going to put in our proof. They're the elements of our proof. And so now let's get started. Usually what we do is we list our given information. We know we need 3 things to prove something's congruent. So really what we're doing is trying to list those 3 things. So what I'm going to do is go, okay, PQ, this is the first given piece of information, is congruent to PS. That's a side in our triangle, okay? So how do I know that? Well, that was given to me, so I'm going to write given. Okay, there's my side. I'm just going to kind of write out to the side so we can keep up with what we have here. Then they told me QR was congruent to SR. That's also given, isn't it? Okay, so now I got side, side. The only one that works with 2 sides in a row is side, side, side. So I kind of know I've got to find the other side. And we actually already did. PR is congruent to PR. That's my shared side, and they're congruent. Why is that true? Well, that's the reflexive property, okay? So you can put reflexive property. I'm just going to put reflexive since I just, it's hard to get everything fit in on the iPad. All right, that's another side. So now I can say the triangles are congruent. PQR is congruent to triangle PSR. The very last thing in your proof should be the thing you're trying to prove there, and here it is right here, okay? So, and why is that true now? Well, we have 3 sides in a row, so I could just say side, side, side. I could just list it like that, and I'm done with the proof. That's all there is to a proof. Again, you start with what you know. You look for other things that you can know for sure, like a shared side is congruent. And you go, oh, all 3 sides are equal. It's congruent by side, side, side. And you just got to make sure you list all these 3 pieces in your proof like that. So I wrote that out to the side just so you could see that's what I was doing in the proof. All right, let's look at this next proof. We know the given stuff's important, so let's kind of mark up the figure and kind of see what's going on here. QP is congruent to ST, okay? So I'll mark them each with 1 mark. Angle P and angle T are right angles, okay? So let me draw a box on those. So far, I have sides that are congruent, and you could flip those over and see they fit right up on top of each other. And I've got angles that are congruent because right angles are congruent. Those are all going to go in my proof. And then they tell me R is the midpoint of that segment. Let's just think about this for a minute. If R is the midpoint, A midpoint divides a segment into two equal segments. So this piece is going to be equal to this piece. And if you look at this, I've got sides and then angles and then sides. So I know that I could prove this one congruent by side, angle, side. Now, they don't ask me to prove it congruent, but I'm going to need to do that first because what they want to know is that QR, and I'll draw this in yellow since that's what we're trying to prove. We're trying to prove QR is congruent to SR. Well, that would be this congruent to this. There's a theorem that you should have, already be aware of because it's was in your notes, and it's congruent parts of congruent triangles are congruent, okay, or corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. We call that CPCTC, okay, just for short because we don't like writing it out. We're lazy mathematicians. Okay, if I can prove these triangles are congruent, then by the theorem CPCTC, I can say those other sides are congruent because they match up, don't they? They're the remaining sides, and we could see that if we flipped triangle STR over and made it face like QPR, that it would all work out. Those would match up and be equal. So that's our game plan. You kind of got to get a game plan first. So here we go. It shouldn't take too long now that we know what we have to do. Okay, so we can say we first need to prove the triangle's congruent, and then by CPCTC, matching parts will be congruent. So statement, QP is congruent to ST. That was given. Okay. And then the next one is angle P and angle T are right angles. That was given. I could have probably listed those on one, but since these, I can only write so small on the iPad, I'm just going to go ahead and put it on a separate line. So if I run out of lines, I can always add more. Now, they're right angles, but that doesn't say they're congruent. It just says they're right angles. So I need to state that they're right angles, therefore they are congruent. Because why? Well, all right angles are congruent. I think that should be a theorem that all right angles, I'm going to abbreviate here, congruent, just so I can fit it on the iPad. All right angles congruent. And come on, I can read that, so let me write over that angles. It was meant to be angles. Okay. All right, so now if you look at it, I have a side that I've proven. Now I've got an angle, and I need to show the other side, okay? So what was the other side that we know? They actually told us, they told us R is the midpoint. So let me write that down. R is midpoint of PT, and that was given. But I have to say, okay, now I could say that PR equal TR, and that's the definition of midpoint. Okay, that's what it means to be a midpoint, definition of midpoint. Okay, if they're equal, they're congruent, so we can actually put the congruent symbol over it. We're just going to assume in this book they allow us to do that, and a lot of books do. All right, so now I can say that the triangles are congruent. Now, I need to say that. I have to state that before I can say that corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. I have to first show the triangles are congruent before I can say, oh, since they're equal, they have corresponding parts. So what I'm going to do is now say, okay, those triangles are congruent. Triangle QPR is congruent to triangle STR. Make sure you match up the things that go together. When you get done, you should see that P and T match up because they're both matching angles, and so that's one quick way to catch it. And the reason is SAS. Do you see that because I already had thought about this, and now I'm just making sure, did I prove the S? Yes. Did I prove that? I had already decided that's what I needed to do. Then I proved the first S. Oh, I got the angle, and now I'm going to get the other side. Those all have to be in the proof. So we have to go about that. That's kind of how you know what to do here. All right. So now, since they're congruent, QR and SR are congruent, and I can say it. And the reason I can say it, the whole reason I know that to be true, is corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And again, I'm going to use the CPCTC almost every time you see anybody write a proof. The first time they do a proof and use CPCTC, they write it out, and then they go, okay, now that I've done that once, you're just going to need to know that when I say CPCTC, that's what I'm referring to. And we're done with that proof.